The crystal wine glass shattered against the polished marble floor, but no one looked at the broken glass. Every eye in the grand ballroom was fixed on the young black waitress standing perfectly still, red wine dripping down the front of her white uniform. "I said," Victoria Ashford repeated, her voice echoing across the silent dining hall. "People like you should never touch my family." The billionaire's wife slowly placed the empty wine glass back onto the table before brushing invisible dust from her diamond bracelet. "You've ruined my daughter's birthday dinner," she said with a cold smile. "You're fired." The guests laughed quietly. Several phones were already recording. No one stepped forward, not even the restaurant manager. The waitress lowered her eyes for only a second before calmly picking up the broken pieces of glass with trembling hands. "I'm sorry, ma'am," she whispered. Victoria leaned closer, making sure everyone could hear. "Sorry doesn't belong in my vocabulary." She pulled out a thick envelope from her designer handbag and threw several $100 bills onto the floor. "There," she smirked. "That should cover whatever people like you make in a month." The room filled with uncomfortable laughter. Then, a little girl standing beside Victoria suddenly tugged on her mother's expensive gown. "Mom!" Victoria ignored her. The girl tugged harder. "Mom, that's her." Victoria frowned impatiently. "What now, Emily?" The little girl's frightened eyes never left the waitress. She's the lady from the hospital." The laughter stopped. Several guests exchanged confused glances. Victoria rolled her eyes. "What hospital?" Emily's tiny voice trembled. "The one who promised she'd save my life." Silence swallowed the ballroom. The waitress slowly lifted her head for the first time. Her calm eyes met the little girl's. Recognition flashed across both of their faces. Across the room, the restaurant owner suddenly dropped the serving tray in his hands. The loud crash made everyone jump. His face turned completely pale as he stared at the waitress. "No," he whispered. It can't be her." No one in that luxurious ballroom realized that the woman they had just humiliated wasn't simply a waitress working the dinner shift. She was carrying a secret that would decide whether the billionaire's only daughter would live long enough to celebrate another birthday. 8 hours earlier, the city had not yet awakened. Downtown streets shimmered beneath the pale glow of streetlights, their reflections stretching across rain-soaked pavement after a night of summer showers. Delivery trucks rumbled through empty intersections. Bakers unlocked their storefronts. Office towers remained dark except for a handful of windows where ambitious people had started another day long before sunrise. 3 miles away from the luxury district stood a modest brick apartment building, squeezed between a laundromat and an old pharmacy, paint peeled from its walls. The elevator had been broken for almost a year. On the 4th floor, apartment 4B came alive before dawn. 28-year-old Naomi Brooks quietly tied her curly black hair into a neat bun while checking the time on the cracked screen of an aging phone. 4:47 a.m. She sighed. Another long day. The apartment contained little more than a tiny kitchen, a worn sofa, 2 folding chairs, and a bookshelf overflowing with medical textbooks whose pages had been highlighted so many times they almost glowed. Naomi gently stirred oatmeal on the stove while humming an old gospel song her grandmother used to sing every Sunday morning. Behind her, a sleepy voice broke the silence. "Morning." A 12-year-old boy shuffled into the kitchen, rubbing his eyes. His name was Jaden, her younger brother. Ever since their mother passed away 4 years earlier, Naomi had become everything to him. His sister, his guardian, his teacher, sometimes even his mother. "You've got another science quiz today," Naomi said, placing a bowl in front of him. Jaden groaned dramatically. "Can I be sick?" Naomi laughed. "You used that excuse last Tuesday. It almost worked. It absolutely didn't." For a few minutes they ate breakfast together in peaceful silence. Those few minutes were Naomi's favorite part of every day, because once she stepped outside that apartment, life became much harder. After washing the dishes, Naomi opened a small envelope hidden inside a kitchen cabinet. She counted the money. 1, 5, 10, 20, $43. That was everything left until payday. Rent was due in 6 days. Jaden's school fees were overdue. The electricity company had already sent a final warning. She quietly folded the bills back into the envelope before Jaden could notice. He had enough worries already. "You still working both jobs?" he asked. She smiled. "Only until things get better." He looked at her carefully. "You've been saying that for 3 years." Naomi didn't answer. Instead, she grabbed her waitress uniform from a hanger behind the bedroom door. It was spotless, perfectly ironed. No matter how exhausted she felt, she never allowed herself to arrive looking careless. Her grandmother had once told her, "People don't always remember your words, but they'll always remember your dignity." Naomi carried those words everywhere she went. By 6 o'clock, she had already finished her morning shift at a neighborhood clinic where she worked as a patient care assistant. The pay wasn't impressive. The hours were exhausting, but she loved helping people. Many patients remembered her name long after leaving the clinic. Not because she was the most skilled, because she listened. She noticed when someone looked frightened. She remembered birthdays. She brought extra blankets before anyone asked. The elderly often requested Naomi specifically. Doctors joked she made the hospital feel less like a hospital. She always smiled, even on days when smiling hurt. At 2:30 p.m., after changing clothes in the staff locker room, Naomi boarded a city bus headed toward the Ashford Grand Hotel, the most luxurious hotel in the state. Its rooftop restaurant overlooked the skyline. Reservations were booked months in advance. Politicians, movie stars, professional athletes, billionaires. Naomi had served all of them, yet almost none ever remembered her face. To them, she was simply another waitress carrying silver trays, exactly the way she preferred it. Across the city, another morning was unfolding in a mansion that seemed to belong in a magazine. Victoria Ashford stood before a floor-to-ceiling mirror while 3 stylists adjusted the folds of her custom-made emerald evening gown. Diamonds glittered around her neck. Another assistant carefully selected earrings worth more than Naomi's apartment building. Victoria studied her reflection with satisfaction. Perfection, nothing less. Her husband, billionaire real estate developer Richard Ashford, entered the dressing room while fastening his cufflinks. "You've scheduled 16 photographers for Emily's birthday?" Victoria smiled proudly. 18. Richard chuckled. "She's turning 10, Victoria." "Exactly. This party will be remembered." She wasn't planning a birthday. She was planning a statement. Every influential family in the city had received invitations: business leaders, judges, celebrities, television hosts, cabinet members, even foreign investors. Victoria believed reputation was built in public. Tonight, everyone would witness the perfection of the Ashford family. Failure wasn't an option, not even a tiny mistake, especially not from the staff. She turned toward her event coordinator. "I don't want delays. No broken glasses. No slow service. And if one waiter embarrasses this family," she smiled without warmth, "they'll never work in this city again." The coordinator swallowed nervously. "Yes, Mrs. Ashford." At exactly 5:40 p.m., Naomi adjusted her name tag inside the employee locker room. Outside, the ballroom buzzed with preparations: hundreds of candles, crystal chandeliers, fresh orchids imported that morning, a live orchestra tuning instruments. The biggest private birthday celebration the hotel had hosted all year. The restaurant manager gathered every server into a circle. His expression was unusually tense. "Listen carefully." He looked at each employee one by one. "Tonight's guests include some of the most powerful people in this country. No mistakes, no delays, and whatever happens," he paused, "do not upset Mrs. Victoria Ashford." Several veteran waiters exchanged nervous glances. One quietly whispered, "Good luck." Another muttered, "We're going to need it." Naomi frowned. She had never served the Ashford family before, but the fear on everyone's faces told her everything she needed to know. She took one slow breath, straightened her uniform, picked up her serving tray, and walked toward Ballroom A, completely unaware that before the night was over, one decision, made by someone else, would place the future of the Ashford family into her hands. By 6:30 that evening, the Ashford Grand Hotel no longer looked like a restaurant. It looked like royalty had arrived. A line of luxury cars stretched around the block. Rolls-Royces, Bentleys, Ferraris, and black SUVs with tinted windows rolled beneath the hotel's golden entrance one after another. Valets hurried across the driveway, while photographers shouted names and camera flashes lit up the marble facade like lightning. Inside the ballroom, a string orchestra played softly beneath two enormous crystal chandeliers imported from Italy. Fresh white orchids covered every table. Hundreds of candles reflected across polished silverware, making the room sparkle like something from a movie. Naomi had served hundreds of wealthy guests before. Tonight felt different. There wasn't just money in the room, there was power. Judges laughed with senators, television anchors chatted with billionaire investors, professional athletes posed for photographs, while famous musicians greeted politicians as old friends. Every conversation sounded expensive. Every smile felt carefully rehearsed. Naomi balanced a silver tray on one hand while weaving gracefully between tables. She had learned something during her years as a waitress. Rich people noticed mistakes far faster than kindness, so she made sure there were none. A glass never stayed empty, a plate never waited, a guest never searched for assistance twice. Several veteran servers watched her from across the ballroom. "You move like you've worked here 20 years, one whispered. Naomi smiled. "My grandmother taught me one thing." "What?" "If you're going to serve people, serve with pride." The older waiter nodded respectfully. "You'll go far." Naomi wasn't so sure. Life had taught her that hard work didn't always change your circumstances. Sometimes it simply helped you survive them. Across the ballroom, Victoria Ashford made her entrance. The orchestra changed songs without anyone asking. Conversation slowed, heads turned. She descended the grand staircase in an emerald designer gown that shimmered beneath the lights. Diamond earrings caught the attention of every camera. Her smile was flawless, practiced, confident. She accepted compliments the way royalty accepted applause. "Victoria, you look stunning. Best party of the year. Emily is going to remember this forever." Victoria thanked each guest while silently judging every outfit in the room. She noticed watches, shoes, jewelry, hair. She believed appearances revealed everything worth knowing about a person. As she greeted another group of executives, her daughter Emily quietly followed behind. Unlike her mother, Emily looked uncomfortable. She wasn't interested in expensive dresses. She wasn't impressed by photographers. She simply wanted a normal birthday. The 10-year-old slipped away from the crowd and wandered toward a large aquarium near the ballroom entrance. She pressed her hands against the glass, smiling as colorful fish swam peacefully through coral. It was the happiest she'd looked all evening. Naomi happened to pass nearby, carrying fresh bread. She noticed Emily standing alone. "Beautiful, aren't they?" Naomi said gently. Emily looked up. "They don't care who's rich," Naomi smiled. "No. They just keep swimming." Emily giggled. For a brief moment, the little girl forgot about the cameras, forgot about the guests, forgot about the expectations that came with being Victoria Ashford's daughter. Naomi reached into her apron pocket. She pulled out a tiny folded piece of paper. "What is it?" Emily asked. "An origami butterfly." Emily's eyes widened. "You made that?" Naomi nodded. "When I was little, my mom taught me." Emily carefully accepted it like treasure. "It's beautiful. I'm glad you like it." Before Emily could say another word, a sharp voice interrupted them. "Emily." Victoria appeared almost instantly. Her smile disappeared the second she saw her daughter speaking to a waitress. "What are you doing over here?" Emily held up the paper butterfly proudly. "She made me." Victoria barely glanced at it. "Sweetheart, there are guests waiting to meet you." She turned toward Naomi. "Please focus on your job." Her tone remained polite, but cold, very cold. Naomi lowered her head slightly. "Of course, ma'am." Emily looked disappointed as her mother led her away. She turned back once, giving Naomi a tiny wave. Naomi smiled and waved back. Neither of them noticed Victoria watching through narrowed eyes. 7:30. Dinner service began. Everything moved like clockwork. Soup, wine, appetizers, main course. Every waiter knew exactly where to stand. Every movement had been rehearsed. Then, the unexpected happened. Near table 12, An elderly guest suddenly grabbed his chest. His breathing became uneven. The fork slipped from his hand and crashed onto the plate. People gasped. His wife screamed. "Harold!" Several guests stood up. Nobody knew what to do. Without thinking, Naomi dropped her serving tray and rushed toward him. Years of working mornings at the clinic took over instantly. "Sir, can you hear me?" The man's breathing became shallow. Naomi loosened his tie, checked his pulse, asked someone to call emergency services. The ballroom froze. Doctors happened to be among the guests, but Naomi reached him first. She spoke calmly, clearly, confidently. "Everyone, please give him space. He needs air." Within moments, one of the cardiologists attending the event knelt beside her. "You've done exactly the right thing," he said quietly. Together they stabilized the man until paramedics arrived. The entire ballroom erupted into relieved applause as Harold was safely taken to the ambulance. Several guests thanked Naomi personally. One senator shook her hand. "You probably saved his life." Naomi smiled modestly. "I just helped." Across the room, Victoria wasn't applauding. She wasn't watching the ambulance. She wasn't thanking anyone. She was staring at the schedule in her event planner. Dinner was now 12 minutes behind. 12 minutes, because of a waitress. 45 minutes later, service resumed. The orchestra played again. Guests relaxed. The crisis seemed over. The restaurant manager quietly approached Naomi. "You handled that beautifully." She shook her head. "I just did what anyone would have done." "No," he smiled. "Not everyone." He handed her another tray. "Mrs. Ashford's VIP table." Naomi glanced toward the center of the ballroom. Victoria, Richard, Emily, several foreign investors, 2 governors, 3 billionaires, the most important table in the room. She inhaled slowly, balanced the tray, and walked forward. At that exact moment, one of the photographers backing away from the stage accidentally stepped onto a young busboy's foot. The startled teenager lost his balance. A champagne bucket tipped sideways. Ice scattered across the polished marble floor. Naomi never saw it. Her right shoe landed directly on one melting cube. The tray tilted. A crystal wine glass spun through the air. Red wine splashed across emerald silk. The orchestra stopped playing. Every conversation ended. Victoria slowly looked down at the stain spreading across her designer gown. Then, she slowly lifted her eyes toward Naomi. There wasn't anger in them. There was something colder, something far more dangerous. Around the ballroom, phones quietly began recording, and this was the exact moment everything changed. The deep red wine spread across Victoria Ashford's emerald gown like spilled paint on silk. For one long, unbearable second, no one moved. No one even breathed. The orchestra had fallen silent. Crystal glasses remained suspended in midair. Every guest stared at the young black waitress standing frozen with the empty silver tray still trembling in her hands. Naomi immediately bent down. "I'm so sorry, Mrs. Ashford." She reached for a clean napkin. Victoria slapped it away before it could touch her dress. The sharp sound echoed through the ballroom. "I said don't touch me." The room became even quieter. Richard Ashford shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Victoria, it was obviously an accident." She silenced him with a single glance. "No." Her voice was calm, far too calm. "This wasn't an accident." She slowly stood from her chair, every camera in the room following her movement. "You people are always careless." Naomi lowered her eyes. "I truly apologize, ma'am. I'll personally pay for the cleaning." A few guests exchanged uneasy looks. The gown alone was rumored to cost more than most families earned in a year. Victoria laughed, a cold, humorless laugh. "You!" She looked Naomi up and down with open contempt. "You couldn't afford to clean one sleeve of this dress." A ripple of awkward laughter spread through a corner of the ballroom. Naomi remained silent. She had learned long ago that arguing with people determined to humiliate you only gave them what they wanted. The restaurant manager hurried over, sweat forming on his forehead. "Mrs. Ashford, please allow us to handle." "Handle?" Victoria interrupted. "Your employee just ruined my evening in front of every important person in this city." She slowly picked up a crystal wine glass from the table. her fingers wrapped around its delicate stem. Every guest watched, sensing something worse was about to happen. Richard quietly whispered, "Victoria, don't." She ignored him. Instead, she stepped closer until she stood barely a foot away from Naomi. Their eyes met, one filled with pride, the other with quiet dignity. Victoria tilted the glass. At first, only a single drop of red wine landed on Naomi's white uniform. Then another. Without warning, she emptied the entire glass over Naomi's head. Cold wine soaked Naomi's neatly pressed uniform, dripped through her hair, and splashed across the polished marble floor. Several women gasped. Someone whispered, "My God." Phones instantly lifted higher. Nearly every guest was recording now. Victoria calmly placed the empty glass back onto the table. "There," she smiled. "Now we're even." Naomi closed her eyes for only a moment before quietly wiping wine from her face. She didn't cry, she didn't shout, she didn't defend herself. That unexpected calm unsettled the room far more than anger ever could. Victoria reached into her designer handbag. She removed several crisp $100 bills. Without hesitation, she tossed them onto the floor at Naomi's feet. "Pick them up." Nobody moved. Victoria's smile widened. "Isn't that what waitresses do?" The silence became unbearable. Even some of Victoria's closest friends looked away in embarrassment. Naomi stared at the money without bending down. Instead, she quietly said, "I don't want your money." Victoria's expression hardened. "You don't get to choose." Just then, a tiny voice broke through the silence. "Mom." Emily stood beside the table, clutching the small paper butterfly Naomi had given her earlier. Her little hands were shaking. Victoria didn't turn. "Not now, sweetheart." Emily stepped closer, her eyes fixed on Naomi. "Mom, she's the lady." Victoria sighed impatiently. "What lady?" Emily swallowed hard. "The lady from the children's hospital, the one who promised she'd help me get better." The ballroom fell completely silent. Naomi slowly lifted her head. Recognition flashed across her face, and across the room, an elderly man in a military uniform, who had been quietly attending the dinner as a guest of honor, suddenly stood up so quickly that his chair crashed backward onto the floor. His eyes locked onto Naomi, then onto the paper butterfly in Emily's hands. His face turned pale. He whispered only 4 words. "Victoria, what have you done?" The ballroom remained frozen. Even the photographers lowered their cameras. Victoria slowly turned toward the elderly man in the military uniform. "General Hayes." Her confident smile faded for the first time that evening. "You know this waitress?" General Robert Hayes ignored the question. Instead, he walked straight toward Naomi. His polished metals reflected beneath the crystal chandeliers as hundreds of stunned guests watched him stop only inches from her. Then, to everyone's disbelief, the decorated 4-star general straightened his posture and saluted her. Not casually, not politely, with absolute respect. Gasps swept across the ballroom. Victoria blinked in disbelief. Richard Ashford stood from his chair. "What is going on?" General Hayes lowered his salute, but never took his eyes off Naomi. "I prayed we'd never meet again under circumstances like these." Naomi gave a small, respectful nod. "It's good to see you again, General." Victoria laughed nervously. This has to be some misunderstanding." General Hayes slowly turned toward her. "Misunderstanding?" His voice was calm, but every word carried the weight of command. "The only misunderstanding tonight is that you think you've humiliated an ordinary waitress." The room fell silent once again. Emily stepped beside Naomi, still clutching the tiny paper butterfly. "You remembered me." Naomi smiled gently. "I remember every child." Tears gathered in Emily's eyes. "You said butterflies always find their way home." Naomi nodded softly. "And they do." Victoria looked back and forth between them, completely confused. "What hospital? What is everyone talking about?" General Hayes answered before anyone else could. 3 months ago, my granddaughter was admitted to St. Gabriel Children's Medical Center." He paused. "The pediatric oncology wing." Several guests exchanged worried glances. Emily was there too. Victoria frowned. Emily was only there for routine tests. General Hayes looked directly into her eyes. Routine? He shook his head. No, Victoria. She was there because specialists believed she might need an extremely rare pediatric bone marrow transplant. Richard's face lost all color. You told me they were only investigating. Victoria slowly turned toward her husband. They didn't want to worry us yet, General Hayes continued. During those weeks, one person stayed with those children every morning before her shift ended. He looked proudly at Naomi. She wasn't required to. She wasn't paid. She simply volunteered. Emily smiled through her tears. She read stories to us and folded butterflies and told us not to be scared. Several women quietly wiped tears from their eyes. General Hayes continued. When my granddaughter refused chemotherapy, Naomi sat beside her for nearly 6 hours. When Emily cried because she thought she'd never have another birthday, Naomi was the one who convinced her to keep fighting. Victoria stared speechless at the waitress she had humiliated only moments earlier. Naomi quietly interrupted. General, I didn't do anything extraordinary. They were brave. I just sat with them. No, General Hayes replied firmly. You gave frightened children hope. And sometimes, hope saves lives before medicine can. The ballroom erupted into soft applause. Not loud, not dramatic. Respectful, genuine. Victoria felt every pair of eyes turning toward her. For the first time in years, she wasn't the most respected person in the room. She was the most ashamed, but she still didn't understand the most important part. She looked at Naomi with trembling lips. If Emily remembers you, why didn't you say anything? Naomi answered quietly. Because tonight, I wasn't here as the woman from the hospital. I was here to do my job. Then she looked toward Emily. And because children should never feel like they owe someone for kindness. A heavy silence settled over the ballroom. Just as Victoria struggled to find words, Naomi's phone vibrated inside her apron pocket. She glanced at the screen. Her expression changed instantly. The color drained from her face. She whispered only one sentence. The donor results are back. Then she looked at Emily, and tears filled her eyes for the very first time.